right. Ungodly mechanical voice. We're ready to get started. Good morning, or wait, technically, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry about that. Just switched from morning to afternoon here on us. Thanks for joining us. I'm Horacio Mendez, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Woodstock Institute. As we were talking about just a few minutes ago, in the past, we used to be able to hold annual events like this surrounding the release of our lending fact book, back when we could meet in person, when we didn't have to wear a mask. And while we're really looking forward to the day where we can do that again, hopefully shortly, and I have actually a wooden desk, so I'm knocking on it right now. Too much is happening for us to wait before we have an honest conversation about what the lending data in the Chicagoland region is telling us. It was just a couple of summers ago that WBEZ and City Bureau published an article that highlighted what our lending fact books have been saying for the better part of 4 decades. Debt continues to flow where it's always flowed, to the wealthier and wider communities. And looking back, those communities suffering from economic disinvestment and redlining 36 years ago are no better, and in some cases worse off than they are today. There's been no lack of effort by the city, the county, the state, banks, foundations, and nonprofits to address this depressing reality. But the return on our investment isn't nearly where we'd all like it to be, and we've been able to break through the calcified layers of unfortunate laws and policies to change the systemic nature of economic inequality. So do we continue to do the same things expecting different results, or do we try something new? Well, the research team at Woodstock, led by Spencer Cowan and comprised of Janice Guson and Tiffany Lyons, want to try something new as it relates to our fact book and our data portal, which is why we're all here today. One of our highest priorities is to both enhance the functionality and the accessibility of these tools. Through outreach and feedback, we want to expand the data that you see in the fact book and create an interactive, user-friendly online data portal that allows community organizations and residents to determine for themselves what local priorities need to be addressed as it relates to community and economic development. All right. I have personal experience about how a well-intentioned outsider can invest in ways that are helpful, but don't always get to the core issue affecting communities. As a banker, I used to really enjoy going to ribbon cuttings for some of the community-based facilities, charter schools, multifamily affordable housing developments that we financed. And often I would show up and talk to some of the nonprofit organizations we partnered with, but I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk to residents. And after a few minutes of getting to know them, asking questions about their family, about their lived environment, more often than not, I would ask them, where would you rate this in terms of what it is that you or your community needs? And more often than not, I would get thanks and a phrase along the line of, what you did was really nice, but what we really needed was ... And that really showed me sometimes how detached the process of economic and community development can be at a high level to what's happening at the grassroots level. So Woodstock's aim is to arm and educate with the ultimate goal to empower local advocacy. So this for me is exciting. It all begins today and it all starts with you. So thank you. I hope you're willing and able to be a vocal and ongoing partner in our work moving forward. With that, I am thrilled to hand things off to Woodstock's research team. So take it away, Janice.
Thank you, Horacio. My name is Janice Guzon, and I am a research associate on the team. And I'll go ahead and let our research director introduce himself, Spencer Cowan.
Hi, I'm Spencer Cowan, Director of Research. I agree with Horacio. One of our goals of the research team is to empower local communities by giving them the information that they need. What you'll see today is information that we think is a start, but it's not the end product. It's a work in process. It's a way to start a conversation with you about what you need, about what we can do to help you get the information that you can use to improve your communities. Having said that, I will pass it off to Tiffany because I am the lucky one who gets to work with Janice and Tiffany, and I would like Tiffany to introduce herself.
Thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Janice. My name is Tiffany Lyons, and I am the newbie on the block in terms of the research team. And I just echo what our president and what my esteemed direct report said about having this information available to our community partners and to residents so they can empower themselves and so they'll know what's going on, beneath the surface, behind the scenes. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad that everybody's here today to join us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess with that, we'll go ahead and start. So I have always believed that research is central to pushing policy, which is why I have been working on our data portal along with the rest of our research team. And before we start, actually, I'm going to ask everyone to go ahead and mute yourself and hold all questions until our Q&A session, which will be after the presentation. If you have any urgent questions, you can always leave your questions in the chat until then. So as Horacio and my teammates have mentioned, we believe in democratizing data here at Woodstock. Information is power, and we believe in giving the power of information about our neighborhoods and our region to the people. So I'm just going to ask everyone to envision for a moment that you live in a food desert. What would that look like? That would look like maybe lack of access to nutritious foods, having to turn to gas stations and supermarkets to get your groceries. And what if I asked you then what it would look like if you lived in a financial desert? How would you describe that? You might say, well, maybe a lack of access to bank branches. Bank branches aren't within a walking distance really of your neighborhood, having to turn to payday lenders and pawn shops when you need a loan. And we wanted to provide some resources for really honing in on those factors, which is why we created the Chicago Area Community Lending Fact Book, which is the print copy of our data portal, and the data portal is the dynamic version, which is on our website. And what does the community lending data portal contain? So it has demographic data, first of all. So that includes racial composition, home ownership rates, renter versus owner, mortgage status, income. Then we have historical data, area foreclosures, loans originated, types of loans, for instance, home loans, refinance, home improvement, multifamily. And then finally, lending behaviors. So small business loans that have been loaned out, mortgage loan amounts by race, and lenders with the largest number of loans in each geography. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. And where does the data come from? So the data actually comes from the Community Reinvestment Act and the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, both federal laws that were signed in the 1970s that require lending institutions to tell the public information about their lending practices. So for anyone who's not familiar, the Community Reinvestment Act actually asks banks and lending institutions to reinvest back in their community. So keep that in mind as we go through our presentation. There are a lot of ways in which people can use the data portal, and we've come up with some examples of some use cases. For instance, you might ask, what does my neighborhood look like compared to the rest of Chicago? And I'll go ahead and do a live demo of that. And just show everyone that this is kind of an overhead view of the demographics of the 7-county region of Chicago. So that's Cook, DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Lake, McHenry, and Will counties. But if I was specifically interested in a certain neighborhood. So in this case, I'm going to use Austin as an example. I'm going to deselect all and just select Austin. And that gives me some demographic information on that neighborhood. And these numbers may or may not look familiar to you, but let's just go over some quick info that we can glean about Austin from these charts. So we can see from the population graph that the population is predominantly Black, and almost half the population has an income of less than 30%, or $30,000. There's more renters than owners, and when it does come to owners, white and Asian residents are more likely to be the homeowners. So how does that compare to the rest of Chicago? Well, we select all again from the dropdown, and then just select the radio button for Chicago only. And you can see from there the numbers for Chicago overall. And just to go through that quickly, the Chicago overall population is primarily white or predominantly white. Homeownership levels are about 50% or more across all races, with the exception of the Black population. And there are more renters versus owners, and income is for about half the population is less than $60,000. And the other half with an income has an income of above $60,000. So going from there, another question we might ask is, are lending institutions practicing fair lending in my community? And this is where we get to the really good stuff. So for that, we might look at mortgage lending. And here you can see all the details about mortgage lending within the neighborhood. So again, I'm going to hone in on Austin as an example. And you can see up here the number of applications for mortgage loans, the number of loans that were actually originated from those applications, and then some more granular details here. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to the average loan amount by race. And here in Austin, we can see, we know that the population is predominantly Black from what we just saw in the demographics. But it's interesting that actually the Black population has the lowest average loan amount out of all of the other races in the neighborhood. So some food for thought there. And you can actually select CRA to see whether the lending institutions that were obligated to reinvest in communities are meeting that same criteria and matching that pattern that we saw overall, which they are. They are lending much less on average to the Black population. So another question we might ask is, how is housing in my community? A lot of foreclosure groups or a lot of housing groups may overlook foreclosures as a variable, but it can actually tell a pretty rich story. So going to our foreclosures tab here, we can see for all of the 7-county region, a general downward trend in foreclosures. But say I just want to look at Chicago. I deselect all the other cities. And we're going to look at Chicago. Same thing, general downward trend. And now let's zoom in a little more, hone in a little more on this, and check out Austin. So it seems like it's following the general downward trend of the other two geographies, but let's consider comparing it to a different neighborhood in Chicago. So let's look at Lincoln Park, for instance. When you actually see the numbers, there is a pretty drastic difference. So Lincoln Park actually comprises only 0.8% of Chicago foreclosures, whereas, at least in 2019, whereas Austin comprises 6% of Chicago's foreclosures. There's a huge difference there, 6% versus less than 1%. Now, we already may know this intuitively, but to be able to see these numbers is so critical to actually making the changes that we need and pushing them. So now I want to kind of zoom out again and just cover one of our takeaways that we had at Woodstock regarding the data of the data portal. So when we actually look at the top lenders page, and just to demo it live, you can actually filter, as with all of the other tables, you can filter by ascending or descending order by clicking on this icon here. But by default, it's sorted right now by originations. And let's look at the data for Chicago. So it's pretty interesting that in our top 10, we actually see non-bank lenders. So Guaranteed Rate, Quicken Loans, Loan Depot are some of our top lenders in Chicago. And again, just to kind of hone in on things, let's look at Austin. And let's just see even the top 5 lenders, which you can specify here in our slider. And that paints an interesting picture of who's lending in neighborhoods. So what we discovered is that non-bank lenders originated more mortgages than bank lenders. And this means that banks originated larger loans on average, or in other words, non-bank mortgage lenders originated more loans to low and moderate income borrowers than banks, which is significant. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Horacio to have him further explain why this was such a surprising takeaway for us.
Yeah, thanks, Janice, and I'll let Spencer jump in as well. When we started digging into the numbers, and primarily triggered by some of the legislative action here in Illinois with the introduction, the passage, and the signing into law of the Illinois Community Reinvestment Act, we peeled the layers of all the rich data we have behind the fact book, and normally the pages you see are only the tip of the iceberg. There's an awful lot more data behind that, which we're starting to put now into this data portal that all of you can play with, and trying to make it so it's not too wonky, so anybody can kind of get some interesting information and come to the same realizations that we have with regard to some of this data. But we found over the last few years a big shift in terms of the market share for mortgage lending, away from the more conventional financial institutions that have obligations under the Community Reinvestment Act, the federal law that requires financial institutions to reinvest into the communities that they're taking deposits from. The dollar amounts from those CRA covered institutions, the banks primarily, the dollar amount of each loan is getting higher, but the number of the loans was getting lower, which just led us to start parsing the data even more and realizing that what we considered to be the banks with the branches in our communities were doing a lot more activity on the higher end, the jumbo loans, which obviously are concentrated in certain communities of Chicago that are wealthier and less diverse. On the other side were the lenders that were doing the most in terms of number of loans throughout Chicago, which were those that were not covered by the Community Reinvestment Act. Those loans tended to be much more in the conforming range, and by conforming, those are the lower dollar amounts that typically end up getting sold through Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae into the secondary market. But those aren't necessarily the financial institutions that are an active part of the community in the same way that bank branches are. You're not going to go to Guaranteed Rate to figure out how to save money for your kid's college account. You're not going to go to Quicken Loans to start wondering about how to use equity in your home to start a small business, or retirement planning. There's this whole financial journey that people go through, and these non-bank lenders are transactional. They really just focus on that one product, which is mortgage. So when you look at this data, it goes beyond simply the imbalance that we see between those banks that have CRA and those mortgage lenders that don't have CRA. You take a few steps back and you start realizing that where financial institutions are engaging is changing. What that means towards the lived experience and the financial journey for people on the low and moderate income spectrum of the economy may be changing as well. And that gives us additional information for us to dive deeper into the lived experience of what's happening in the community. Spencer, would you add anything to that?
The other thing I could add, and again, it comes from looking at the data over time, is we see these trends. And one of the things we want to do with the data portal is allow you to see the trends so you can see what's happening. One of the surprising things that came from looking at the data, and we did a presentation in last June, was that banks have basically gotten away from underwriting FHA or VA loans. Those are the more subsidized loans that are targeted at lower income borrowers. And banks went from originating about 75% of FHA and VA loans to originating only about 19%. So you can see these trends and see how banks, subject to the Community Reinvestment Act, have moved away from actually reinvesting in the community and using products that are designed to help lower income borrowers. And that's part of that shift that Horacio was talking about to higher dollar value loans. It's more lucrative for the banks. And clearly it's a shift from lending in some communities with lower values to what we've seen is more and more of the investment by banks going into higher income communities.
So this data is a starting point for deeper conversations, which is something we want to have at the community level. But we're also having conversations with lenders and presenting this information to a group of mortgage lenders, including banks and mortgage companies. The feedback on the FHA piece was after the mortgage meltdown of the 2008 and on, there was a lot more risk associated with recapture on that lending piece of FHA, which made banks very nervous about re-engaging and lending in the same amount of volume. So this offers an opportunity for Woodstock to then turn around and start talking to people managing those programs, either in Washington, D.C. or with trade associations, to see what can we do to be able to make sure that there's greater involvement by financial institutions in this kind of lending, as opposed to them completely walking away and giving it to another portion of the population. So that way we can include that journey and that connectivity to the broader financial industry as opposed to just a transactional piece of the mortgage. So data can speak volumes, but it's usually just a starting point for a deeper conversation to understand the context from which that data originates. Janice?
And speaking of context, I wanted to actually turn the conversation to Tiffany, who has a long and storied history with a number of direct service providers, nonprofits here in Chicago. And I wanted her to speak to how direct service providers may actually use this, since that's maybe something that you might be wondering. You've seen the higher level perspective on how this can be used. Now for the direct service level. So Tiffany, take it away.
Thank you, Janice. And I'm really excited to talk about this portion of how the data portal can be used, because I know that for a lot of direct service providers, they really want to make sure that the services they provide to their constituents or to their patrons is something that is going to have lasting impact. I remember working at another nonprofit where they wanted to be known as change agents or generational change agents. And something like this, something like the data portal, can be a great tool to be used by nonprofits to instigate that generational change, showing people how in their particular neighborhood, why is it that I can't get a loan? I have the same credit score, I have comparable income, I pay my bills on time. So why is it I cannot get a loan for a moderately priced house? What's going on? If they go to a nonprofit and a nonprofit has this information, they can use this information to coach that person. This is what you need to do to get a loan. These are the roadblocks or the barriers that can exist. But having this information can allow that nonprofit to help that particular individual get that loan to buy that house. Having this kind of information from the data portal can help nonprofits when they're trying to get funding, in terms of having more focused services for the constituents. A lot of the times it's almost a scattershot approach in terms of offering services to patrons. And when they can be more focused and they can be more data informed about what is needed in that particular community, they get more output. They get more outcomes for their constituents. I know of one nonprofit, and I'm sorry they're not here with us today, because I would have loved to pick his brain. But this nonprofit actually has a bank that's in the same building where they are. So not only are they providing services for their patrons, their patron can literally go downstairs and open up an account. Now that right there is what Horacio was talking about, having that connection with the community. That person can go down there and open up a bank account. That person can go down there and talk about savings. That person can go down there and talk about how they can help their child save for college. That is exactly what something like the data portal can do for nonprofits, particularly if you're dealing with housing advocacy, if you're dealing with anti-racial work. This data portal is a game changer. I cannot stress that enough. I have never seen anything like this at another nonprofit that I worked at. And I'm not trying to age myself, but I worked at plenty of them. And I've never seen anything like this. So this is a game changer. It really is.
Thank you. And
you're welcome.
We'll just cover a couple of other goodies on the data portal that we didn't get a chance to cover with our ways to use the data portal. But you can actually, on most of the graphs, click on expand, and say you're somebody who's interested in presenting this information to a patron, as Tiffany was saying, or in a presentation as an advocate. You can actually single out these graphs and blow them up, and you can go ahead and download. When you click on this link right here, you can download it as a PNG or an image file. You can also download it as a PDF or a PowerPoint slide. And you can do that for any of the pages of the data portal. We also have our small business lending page, which shows you a view of how much small business loans are being made to LMI versus non-LMI tracts or parts of each neighborhood, and in what amounts. And finally, we have our bank branches page, And this only covers, for now, the Chicago area, but we will be expanding this to the 7-county region. But it's very interesting to look at this at a glance and see that over the years, for instance, Burnside has never had any bank branches in the last, well, since 2017. So some food for thought there on how you can use the data portal. And we'll also go ahead and provide some future features for everyone to take a look at that we're planning on incorporating. But first, we'll go ahead and go into a Q&A session and see if anybody has any questions about the data portal and what we've covered so far.
Hey, Janice, I got a private question about the dynamic between mortgage companies and banks. And this was also something that I think we saw about, it's like Juan Calixto asked a question over at CCLF about non-banks packaging the loans and then selling them to banks. Having been on the purchasing side of those mortgage-backed securities, I just wanted to share both Spencer and my answer to that the information about the borrower associated with each individual loan that a financial institution purchases through mortgage-backed securities is not typically, and I have not seen that at any of the institutions where we purchase mortgage-backed securities for CRA purposes, has not been used as an opportunity to engage with those borrowers to provide other financial products and services. So that's kind of a gap that should probably be filled, but has not. And as a follow-up, somebody asked me about what the Illinois CRA may do to the relationship between mortgage companies and banks. And that's a really interesting question and a very good one. The dynamic between mortgage companies and the banks that typically buy their loans for CRA purposes may change significantly now with the Illinois CRA. And it'll be interesting to see if these changes forces conventional banks to increase their organic CRA qualified mortgage lending, meaning like mortgage lending that they themselves go out and originate. If the flow from mortgage companies dries up because they need to originate these loans for their own purposes for Illinois CRA. A lot of that is going to depend upon whether or not IDFPR, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, and their rules are going to allow consideration for mortgages that are originated by a mortgage company and then immediately sold, or whether to a bank, and whether or not that still counts under the CRA, or whether or not there's an expectation that mortgage companies may hold on to these for a little bit before they sell them. The business model needs to be responsive to the fact that mortgage companies usually don't have a ton of capital to just make loans and hold on to them. The business model is for them to sell it. So it'll be interesting to see how these Illinois CRA rules change that relationship a little bit. And we'll be up front and center with the data portal to be able to show those changes on a year-by-year basis. So that'll be something that'll be really interesting to watch and map out. Let's see if we have any other questions.
So we're a small enough group that I want to encourage folks. We do have one question in the chat, Horacio. Peter asked from Age Options, asked about the subregions of Cook County. Janice, if you want to kind of show us what it might look like to take a quick spin through those. But if folks want to come off mute and just ask a question or share something about how this might be useful in your community, we're a small enough group. I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah, you can raise your hand and we can pick on you.
So the way that you would look at the subregions, and just as an example, we traditionally in our fact book have sort of separated out the different areas of Cook County. So if you click on Cook County here, you can actually, you can deselect if you don't want to look at any of Chicago. You can see that there is North Cook, Northwest Cook, South Cook, Southwest Cook, and West Cook. If you select all, this is going to include all of Chicago as well. So this is applicable to almost all of the tabs on the data portal. If you just go ahead and, for instance, select DuPage, we don't have subregions for DuPage yet, but hopefully in the future, we can get a little more granular with the way that we look at each of these counties. Spencer?
I was going to say, if you start to talk about the boundaries of, say, townships or census places, we can do approximations. I don't think we're going to put them on the website immediately, because that's a completely different way of aggregating the data. And the mortgage data that we have are all geocoded at the census tract level. That's the smallest. So we would be compiling, say, New Trier Township based on the census tracts that are included in that township. That would be a custom aggregation. We do technical assistance for nonprofits and community groups. And so you can email us or call Woodstock and ask your questions, and we can help you with that. We can do a data aggregation for you if that's what you're interested in, or we can teach you how to do it over and over for yourself. But for right now, we're working on just getting the data here and expanding it. And again, I personally would like to see more direct comparison between neighborhoods where we can overlay charts or put them side by side so you can compare. But that's what I'm interested in. That may not be what community groups are interested in. And what we want is to make this something that gives community groups what they want. So if that turns out to be aggregations at census place, a city, or at a township, we'll figure out how to do it.
So one question I just got is, can this information be mapped like what WBEZ did? Or is that a future plan? Is that a future, I'm not quite sure what word that is. It was misspelled, sorry.
Yeah, so in our future features, we'll actually be talking about how we'll be incorporating mapping into our data portal. I'll go into a bit more specificity about that. But yes, the short answer is that we do want to have a map that can display all of these different variables so that you can actually visualize on different layers what these demographics, what the lending data, and what foreclosures, bank branches look like over the years on a map of the Chicago area or a map of Illinois.
Great. So that actually feeds into the very next question. This was really well timed. Can you compare over years to see whether or not this data is going in the right direction or the wrong direction?
Yeah, so you can see some of our tabs already have some historical data. The foreclosures, for instance, go back all the way to 2008. And the bank branches as well go back to 2017. But the hope is that over the next year, we can start to incorporate historical data as well as future data. So that's 2020 and 2021. Right now, we just have 2019 for the most part. But we do want to have historical trends so that you can, like you said, really see changes over time with all these different variables.
Yeah, this is Hosea asks a good question here. It would be interesting to see how aldermanic boundaries affect this data as well. That's assuming, the city council can figure out what those boundaries are. Yeah, that's a mapping feature that I had created out in California, and it was particularly useful at the policy level. So that might be something, I'm not sure we have the shape files for that or whether or not that's an additional layer of complexity, Janice and Spencer, that we can think about as a future feature.
Yeah, in the past, we've actually mapped out congressional districts as well. So we'll definitely consider whether we can find a shapefile of the aldermanic boundaries, getting a little more granular with our breakdown of geography.
Yeah, Jose, I think that might be a bit of a challenge for some of the community areas I'm not used to. I'm relatively new to Chicago, but in visiting Rage in Inglewood, the statement that they are part of 5 different aldermanic boundaries in one community area, to me really raised a lot of questions about how to be able to manage and present data and what it means either by political boundary or by community area. So getting that kind of feedback from community organizations in terms of how to parse this data or even how to map it will be greatly helpful. So we'll need input from a lot of organizations like yours to be able to figure that out.
Having said that, I hope that people will accept the fact that electoral boundaries are not necessarily drawn on the same basis as the boundaries for the data that we're able to get. Aldermanic districts, as Horacio said about Rage, cut across a lot of community areas. They cut across a lot of census tracts. It makes it difficult, not impossible. It's more of a challenge.
Yeah. So one other question I got was, somebody said, I don't see a download or a print option. Are those available?
Yeah, so if you scroll down right here at this bottom toolbar right here, you can see an icon that is a box with an arrow pointing down. And that's how you can download this page as an image or as a PDF or a PowerPoint. Now, if you're looking for the data, the raw data itself, we do provide that through technical assistance. So you would have to reach out to us via Spencer, and we can provide you with the information you need.
I think one other question I got is it possible to compare I'm sorry, I'm trying to read this here and my screen is doing something weird. Is it possible to dig into bank mortgage lending data specifically, or are they just ranked?
Bank mortgage data specifically.
I think maybe the question is that when you look at the bank rankings, whether or not it's possible to just pick one bank and kind of look at how they're doing, or is it just community by community? That's my guess in terms of the question.
So right now you can get sort of an overall sense of how that bank is doing in the 7-county area or within a community. But if you scroll across for each of these lenders, and if you're looking for a specific lender, you can expand this display and sort by or filter by alphabetical order to find the lender. And you can see information about how they've done with their lending practices within that geography. So I'm not sure if there was additional information about the banks that that person was looking for, but this should provide at least some insight into their lending behaviors.
Okay. No, I think
and as with a lot of other things, if you're interested in a specific bank in a specific area, I'm doing one right now that's looking at lending by a bank in a metropolitan statistical area overall, we can do that as part of technical assistance. So if you look at, you want to see how JP Morgan Chase is doing in Kane County, we can give you much more detailed analysis of that as part of technical assistance.
So Janice,
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether or not you can talk a little bit about whether or not, it's like how this data portal may either build off of or compare to other data sources that are available in the community.
Sure. And before I do that, it looks like Calvin has a question.
I just wanted to mention, you can not only download the images but you can download the spreadsheets too, which I think Janice mentioned, so you can get the data. And one of the features that strikes me as very powerful is you can add data from different, when you select multiple community areas, it literally adds the data together, so that you can select a group if you're interested in a section of the city and community areas, or you're interested in all the predominantly minority community areas compared to the white ones or something. You can download them separately and then export that data and look at the data. So it strikes me that, they're very powerful ways of looking at the data.
Yeah, that's a great point, Calvin. So when you go through the sub-region scroll down menu, drop down menu, you can actually, as Calvin said, specify more than just one community. If I wanted to look at the west side, for instance, I could do Austin, East Garfield Park, West Garfield Park, and Humboldt Park. And it'll show me that entire region's information. So not restricted to just one specific geography. And then, yes, Horacio, going back to your question. So the CFPB and the FFIEC, as well as Illinois Record Information Services, all provide a lot of this data, again, for the public, so that the public can really see with some transparency into the lending practices of different institutions. But if you go onto those websites, you're not really going to see the capacity to customize your own visuals. And in a lot of ways, the work that we did here with the data portal was really conceptualizing how to present this data in a way that was concise, that communicated all of the information without you having to dig through large data sets, and also just provides a really great bird's eye view that you can customize however you want. As we just pointed out, you can customize it by region. If you want aggregations of several neighborhoods, you can do that. I don't know of any other data portals that provide lending information at this level and also at this level of customizability. So this is an incredibly interactive tool that really parses a lot of very complex information about lending data that's out there. Yes, so I would definitely say this is a one-of-a-kind data portal.
There may be a couple more questions, but I know we only have about 7 or 8 minutes left. So I know you want to move on to some other things.
Yeah, and just to reassure everybody, if your question wasn't answered, as Spencer has mentioned, we do offer technical assistance. So if you want more in-depth information or customized research, we do provide that, and you can reach out to us at Spencer's email, which is scowan@woodstockinst.org, and we can work with you to provide you the information that you need. And just moving on to some of the future features that we had teased and that we do want to incorporate in the future. At some point, we do want to add a map that will light up to show exactly which geographies you can or you have selected in the subregion. And we also, as somebody had requested, want to integrate mapping. So for instance, on the data portal with the bank branches page, you will be able to kind of click and zoom in on specific points on the map to see what bank branch that is, that's in a specific neighborhood, and hopefully start adding basically a filter for the year so that you can see as you click through the years, the dots disappearing for bank branches. Similar with similar kind of a concept with how we want to integrate mapping into the other pages on the data portal. And then some upcoming features that we do want to incorporate over the next year or so is statewide data for all of Illinois, so not just the 7-county area. Historical trends, as somebody had requested, so that includes 2017, 2018, 2019 data all the way up to 2021. And to that point, we're hoping that 2020 data will be available by April and 2021 data will be available by December. And now to hand it over to the audience, which is going to be the most critical piece of this data portal. We want to know what you want to see on the data portal. So we talked about all those upcoming features and future features, but really we want to know what's important to you. So what should we prioritize? What features do you not see that you do want to see, for instance, the aldermanic map? And how can we better help you? How can we provide the information that you really want to see? So after this brown bag closes, we will send out a survey that provides some options to opt into, I guess, more in-depth interviews is what we'd call them, to really pick your brains on how we can improve the data portal, how we can make it better for you and more useful for you. So if you do want to opt into that, please take our survey, and there's a couple of short questions as well to see how useful you find the data portal right now. So please go ahead and check your emails for that link after our brown bag.
So Rachel Johnston from the Chicago Rehab Network had asked, maybe we can add some historical data from some critical years, like the the mortgage crisis of 2008, or
Yeah.
adding every 10 years, like 2000 or 1990, to have that broader picture. Maybe that's
That's a
an
great
easier
idea.
prospect and a lower obstacle to overcome than having every single year
Yeah.
along that continuum. But that's actually a great idea, and that's exactly what we're looking for, Rachel. The opportunity to present to your members, to go into the community and have the same kind of conversation with them and getting their feedback. So that way we actually build something that is going to be used versus something that we find intellectually appealing ourselves internally.
Well, thanks. I can't wait to start using the data. I'm going to use it today. Appreciate you guys.
And Gordon, did you want to go
Yeah,
ahead?
thank you. This
cover-
is my cue to give a little, we wanted to give a little plug and advertisement for another project that Woodstock Institute is working on, which is the We Prosper Illinois, weprosperir.org, and then the Spanish language version, weprosperir.org/es. A lot of folks who are on the call were either directly involved or very familiar with the Predatory Loan Prevention Act that passed last year. And, one of the things that did was it created the 36% APR cap. We're working to make sure that the 36% APR cap across the board, that's a sort of a national gold standard, stays. And we know that there are folks out there who'd like to keep that from happening. One of many ways that we're working on that is to provide consumer education directly. And weprosperir.org, and then the Spanish language version of that is one tool to do that. So if you haven't seen it yet, check it out. And likewise, we'll be sending out a survey for this, but we're always glad to hear your thoughts or questions about that or any other work at Woodstock as well. Thanks. Thanks, Janice.
And thank you everyone for coming to our brown bag. Again, please reach out to us if you have any questions or any requests for data, and hopefully you found this useful.
Maybe next time we'll actually have brown bags and lunch. Thank you, everybody.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye all.